friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Well, this is just a quick video. I want to give a few tips about dehydrating bone broth. I already have a video, instructional video on dehydrating bone broth that I'll link to down below if you want more details about the actual process. This is just a few tips in regards to that because of some questions I've had come in. Now, a lot of you know that I personally, when it comes to dehydrating things like that, anything liquid, I like to use my silicone sheets like this in my dehydrator, or even on or next to my wood stove on that particular rack. And any kind of liquid thing, so eggs, milk, or anything that's like cream cheese, sour cream, those kind of things that you're going to want to spread on there. And so a lot of people have been coming to me lately saying they've had a lot of issues with their bone broth sticking. So what I have found from experience is that the thinner you put it on your silicone sheet, the more likely it is to stick. There may also be some other things in the broth that could cause it to stick more, because sometimes I have no issues at all and sometimes it really wants to stick. But I've noticed when it's been the biggest issue is when I've had it on pretty thin layer. Now obviously a thin layer is going to dehydrate much quicker than a thicker one, but a thicker one is less likely to stick, or at least is much easier to get off once it's fully dried because of the thickness. Where the thin, it's just like, you know, you just can't really get under there to get it off. So that is one thing that can help, is just making sure you're not putting it on too thin. Make sure you're filling up that sheet. I'm not talking about filling it all the way to the top, but getting a good layer in there so that you've got that thickness to work with. Then the other thing that you can try that may be helpful, I haven't tried this, but is to, before you put the broth on your sheet, maybe just brush a very light layer of some kind of oil. Usually your broth should have some kind of fat in it anyway, at least a little bit. But if not, if that's something that you're removing all the fat from the broth, then simply take just just brush on a thin layer of some kind of oil. This can be coconut oil, avocado oil, or almond oil, something like that, that would just help make the broth come off of there easier once it is fully dry. Now, what I've done when I've had my broth stick really badly because it was on very thin, I simply took my spatula like this. So any kind of thin stainless steel spatula is going to work best. And then I just worked it off, as you can see in this image right here. And I found that worked pretty good. So I just kept working it this way and this way from all angles. And that got most of it off. There were still a bunch of little pieces I just didn't worry about too much because I have a lot of bone broth put up. And just in case you're wondering, what's the benefits of dehydrating bone broth? Well, it's because it saves so much space. So I kept having, piling my bone broth up every time I'd make it each year, especially after Thanksgiving, in my freezer in jars. And the plan was, once I got enough to fill up my very large canner, I was going to can it. But I never could quite get enough to do that, because then I would use it. I'd pull a jar out every so often and use it. And so it was like, finally, I think I noticed that I don't know that I ever actually watched the video, but I know Mary's Nest has a video on dehydrating bone broth. I'm like, that is a really good idea. And so I thought I'll just start dehydrating it, and I love it because it takes up so little room, and I can store it in my pantry once I vacuum seal it, which this one is not, but I vacuum seal it, then store it in my pantry, and then use it whenever I need it. I could take like 6 to 8 jars, something like that, and then narrowed it down to just a couple of pint jars. And so this one is, the reason it's not sealed is because I actually had this one in my freezer. But if you have it vacuum sealed, you don't have to keep it in your freezer. You can simply just store it in your pantry. But I do like to keep one in my freezer, so when I need some, I just grab it out, take a spoonful. And part of the reason why is because it is a meat-based product, and I usually have a lot of fat in there. And so just to prevent the fat from going rancid, then either vacuum sealing or freezing is best. But since it's just the one jar, it's not a big deal. That's the jar I'm going to be working through. I take a spoonful or 2 spoonfuls, depending on what I'm using it in and how much I need. And then instead of vacuum sealing it between every use, I just put it back in the freezer. I just keep it in the door of my freezer, and then it's easy use. And I still taking up far less room than all those jars, those pint jars I had of bone broth in my freezer waiting to can someday, which then I never did end up doing. But also some people did say that parchment paper is also another option. Some people found it easier to use parchment paper for their bone broth. So you would either still need a silicone thing with the lip around it to put the parchment paper in, or you would have to find a way to pinch up the corners of your parchment paper to hold the bone broth in. And then they find they have less problems with it sticking to the parchment paper. Now me, I'm all about using as much reusable stuff as possible. And yes, I know parchment paper can be reused at least a few times, but the silicone can be used over and over again. So to me, it's just a matter of learning how to work with your silicone sheets, like putting that on thicker or using a layer of oil or using the spatula so that you can get the most out of these and then save that parchment paper for when you really, really need it. So anyway, just a few tips right there. Don't forget to check out my more in-depth video I'll be linking to down below. Oh, and if you have any more tips you would like to throw out there, put them in comments down below as well. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.